Good morning, everyone. We're going to get started here. Thank you so much for being with us. I'm Andy Smarick. I'm a mortgage fellow here at the American Enterprise Institute. It's a total honor and pleasure both to have you here, but to host the chairwoman, Virginia Foxx, the head of the House Education and Workforce Committee. She's here to talk about one of the most interesting and important issues happening right now in K-12 and in higher education, what many of us call CTE, career and technical education. Now, just by way of background, many of you know this, there are today millions and millions of Americans who are out of work, many of whom have entirely dropped out of the labor force. But somehow at the same time, we have millions and millions of jobs that are going unfilled. Employers can't find people with the skills necessary to do the jobs that they want. So this raises countless questions for policymakers. Well, is it the case that people out of work are looking for the skills that they need? Is it the case that employers are doing enough or not doing enough to actually make sure that they are providing the skills, the education, so out-of-work people can have the opportunity to fill those jobs? And then for those of us who do K-12 education or even community college, some post-secondary education, are our schools set up to make sure that people have the skills necessary to join the workforce, especially given that things are changing so rapidly and the problems or the opportunities of automation and offshoring and so forth. But what I find most interesting about these issues is that inevitably they end up bumping up against some of the most fascinating and difficult issues in social policy, domestic policy more broadly. That is, you can't talk about CTE without talking about these other issues. So for example, do we have a benefit system for disabilities and welfare that actually foster work, that tell us that it is important? Are we dealing with the opioid addiction crisis in the right way? That means setting up all people so they are able to work. Do we value college enough right now? Some people would say we're valuing four-year college too much because of the expense, and some people question the return on investment. Do we value apprenticeships or work-based training enough? Are we doing enough to do job creation? And on and on and on and on. The point here is all of these issues are, they intersect, and they make up this just a tapestry of issues that domestic policy folks here and the economics team at AEI are working hard on, both discretely and in total. And so I and many others in the weeks, months, years to come are going to be focusing on the intersection of education and skills development more and more. But this is one of the huge reasons we were thrilled to have the chairwoman here. She's been a leader on not just one or two, but a whole host of these fronts over the years. In fact, over decades in many cases. So she is here to talk about CTE, but then more specifically, this great timing of the Perkins Act reauthorization, which her committee is going to be marking up tomorrow. So maybe we'll make some news here today. And then something that is near and dear to many of our hearts is just the philosophical question. Can the federal government do a whole lot of good in this area? Or is it the case that, like with NCLB or some other programs, that we look back and say the federal government probably shouldn't have been so involved in some of these things? Okay, before introducing Congresswoman Dr. Foxx, let me just do a couple housekeeping notes so we're all on the same page. She'll give her remarks up here on the stage. I will have a seat, and then I'm going to come back up here, and we'll just have a quick Q&A session between the two of us. Then we'll open it up to all of you, and then I promise to get you out of here by 9:15 sharp so the chairwoman can go about her business. Now, we have two rules for Q&A at AEI. Number one, please just introduce yourself if you stand up to ask a question, name, affiliation, so we know who is taking part in the conversation. And then the second rule is please take seriously the Q part of Q&A. That is, ask a question. Don't please just give a long speech. I'm sure all of you have great things to say, but we want to keep this snappy and have the conversation continue. So we would appreciate that. This event is being live streamed, so welcome to all the folks in coffee shops or at home or in their offices watching this. There's going to be a video of this event available directly after we conclude here, and the podcast will be produced directly thereafter as well. And then last but not least, for those of you willing and able, interested in tweeting, we are using a hashtag Fox at AEI, so that's Fox, 2 X's at AEI. Feel free to chime in with questions, comments. I'll be monitoring that during the chairwoman's talk so I can try to get some of those questions in. Okay, enough of that. Now on to our honored guest, Virginia Foxx. She represents North Carolina's 5th District in the United States House of Representatives, and she serves as the chair of the House Education and Workforce Committee. Prior to her election to Congress, Dr. Foxx spent 10 years in the North Carolina State Senate. She has been a teacher at Caldwell Community College, a sociology instructor at App State, Appalachian State in North Carolina, and also held several higher education administrative positions as well. She served as the Deputy Secretary for Management in the North Carolina Department of Administration, and prior to her public service working for the state government, she also was the president of Mayland Community College in the great state of North Carolina. So with no further ado, please join me in welcoming our guest, Chairwoman Foxx. Thank you, ma'am.
Thanks. Thanks, Andy. I can't wait to tell my grandchildren tonight that there's a hashtag out there, Fox.AEI. Wow, that's great. I don't think I've ever had one of those before. I'm not sure. Anyway, thank you very much, Andy, for that kind introduction and for really setting the stage so well for the issues that I'm going to discuss today. I think I'm thrilled, by the way, that so many people are paying attention to this issue of what are we going to do to fill the jobs that are currently open and the jobs that are coming open, and how do we close the skills gap that exists, and what do we do about education. So I appreciate it very much. As Andy told you, I've dedicated a large part of my life to education, serving as a college instructor, administrator, 12 years on a local school board, and you learn a whole lot about education from there. I've learned firsthand the many challenges today's educators and students face, as well as how difficult it can be to get reforms across the finish line. And believe you me, I'm learning that firsthand here. But we've done a lot of good work, good bipartisan work in the Committee on Education and the Workforce. We've reformed K-12 education with the passage of the Every Student Succeeds Act, which of course is now called ESSA. We eliminated the Washington Knows Best approach to K-12 education and helped ensure important education decisions are made by parents and state and local leaders. And while we continue our work to ensure ESSA is implemented as Congress intended, after all, a big part of our responsibilities in Congress is oversight, we also want to put forward additional reforms to strengthen education further for the students looking to advance their educations in technical fields like carpentry, manufacturing, computer programming, and even in the liberal arts. This includes supporting reforms that would strengthen career and technical education initiatives, and that's what I want to discuss a little bit today. I have a strong personal connection to career and technical education and apprenticeship programs. Some of you may have already heard this story, but I tell it because it's a real-world example of the challenges facing students who want to get into this field. I have a younger brother. He's actually 8 years younger than I am. He's a very sharp man. In his senior year in high school, he came to me and he said, "I don't want to go to college, but I don't want you and Mom and Daddy to be ashamed of me." And that just broke my heart. I said, "You know, Butch, I wouldn't be ashamed of you. What do you want to do?" He knew that a traditional four-year school was not the pathway for him. But he thought people would think less of him if he didn't have a bachelor's degree. So I told him, you know, again, what could we do, what could I do to help him? And I said, "What do you want to be?" He said, "I want to be a carpenter." Well, I happened to be working at a resort in North Carolina called Beach Mountain, which had just started, and they were building houses, and the contractors there were desperate for skilled people. And so I went to my boss. I worked in the PR department, and I don't even know how I knew about apprenticeship programs, frankly, but I did. And My boss and I, he knew the people at Associated General Contractors in Charlotte, and we contacted AGC. There's a what was then a junior college in Banner Elk called Lees McRae, wonderful school. And we contacted Lees McRae. They said they'd make classroom space available. Community colleges were just beginning in North Carolina, but we got in touch with a community college close by, and they agreed to provide the programs if we could get the instructor. So we worked together to put together a program. There were 17 guys who began the program, and 3.5 years later, my brother and 3 others graduated with their journeyman license. I had the great pleasure of being there to give them their certificates. And my brother went on to become an engineer at a telephone company at Sprint. He didn't have a degree, but he was called an engineer. And then when desktop computers came out, he's the one who picked out my computer, helped me buy it, set it up for me, showed me how to use it. Now, what I tell people, it took me, I had to get 3 degrees to become a success. All he needed was a journeyman's license in carpentry. And I share it with people because I want folks to know that even though you can get a degree, you may not be a success, but many people who don't have degrees don't feel successful. And that's not a good thing in our culture. I'm also on a one-woman campaign to get rid of what I call the T word. And many of you have heard me talk about this also. And I think this is part of what's created what I think of as a 2-tier system in our country. The T word is training. It took me 7 years to get my doctorate. I swear the only thing I remember is a professor one night, in reaction to another student who used that word, sort of pulling himself up and saying, "Please don't ever let me hear you say that word again in conjunction with human beings. You train animals and you educate people." And so I want us to get rid of that word as we're talking about people who are in programs for skill development. Words like this give the impression to people that they aren't a success if they don't have a bachelor's degree. And when I'm back in my district, in fact, all my life, when I ran for the school board, I can remember people coming up to me and saying, "Well, you have an education, but I don't." And I would always say to them, because I knew these people, I'd say, "You don't have a degree, but you have an education because you've been successful in your life." And so we have to get away from that, I think, the notion that a bachelor's degree equates with success and with accomplishment. But unfortunately, as I said, we've created 2 tiers of education. A plan A that includes a 4, maybe a 5 or 6 year nowadays college degree, because only 55% of our students are graduating after 6 years. And a plan B that includes everything else. The reality is, again, I had to get 3 degrees to be a success. All my brother needed was a journeyman's license. We have to change the narrative to accurately reflect this reality. Micro, who many of you remember from the television show Dirty Jobs, testified before our committee this year, expressing this same concern about the stigma that follows those who choose CTE. And I see Mike on Fox News occasionally, and he keeps talking about this, and I'm delighted that he's raising people's awareness. He said, "Millions of Americans still view a career in the trades as some kind of vocational consolation prize. It's a bias as misguided as any other prejudice with us today. And it poses a clear and present danger to our country's overall economic security." Think about that as a prejudice. My brother, like so many men and women who choose career and technical education, chose an education that would help him accomplish his goals and pursue the career he wanted to pursue. He became a success as a result of those decisions, and he's not the only one. We must do better at sharing these successful stories to take away some of that stigma. A few years ago, at a hearing, we had a young man named Paul Say. He testified before the committee. Paul struggled in high school. His attendance was lackluster, and so were his grades. As his friends began making plans to attend colleges, he felt helpless and embarrassed that he would be left behind. When a family member suggested Paul think about a skilled trade as a potential career path, he acted on that suggestion. With the help of a guidance counselor, he enrolled in a CTE program, and through that program received an education in installing and maintaining heating, ventilation, and air conditioning systems, HVAC. Soon after he graduated, he received 2 separate apprenticeship offers from local businesses. He progressed from student to apprentice to journeyman, and today he's a project manager for a mechanical contractor company. He told us his story. Paul said, "I am the American dream." We could go on for hours and discuss other successful CTE stories like Jasmine Morgan from Georgia, who realized her dream of becoming a sports marketing specialist. In California, Alex Wolf was encouraged through a CTE program to pursue a successful career in electrical engineering. Rob Griffin became a project manager at one of the nation's leading steel fabricators. For my brother, for Paul, and others, CTE was a pathway to success. These programs are helping countless men and women acquire the knowledge and skills they need to compete in the workforce and build fulfilling careers. But in order for these people to thrive, we must do everything we can to change the way people think about CTE, shifting the narrative from a Plan B option to a Plan A option. Vice President Pence, when he was then Governor Pence, testified at our committee also. And he said, this is not about a Plan A and Plan B. This is about 2 Plan A's. The reality is, as technology advances, more and more high school students are turning to the field of career and technical education. According to a study conducted by the Department of Education, 94% of high school students and more than 8 million individuals are seeking post-secondary certificates and associate degrees in CTE fields. These programs not only prepare students for their future careers, but they also help with the high school graduation rate. In fact, the department reports 93% of high school students who concentrate in CTE programs successfully graduate high school, a large margin more than the national average of 80% of students who graduate from high school. CTE programs enable students to be actively engaged in their education, raising the likelihood they'll successfully graduate and go on to fulfilling careers. But CTE doesn't just benefit the individual. These programs also contribute to building up a successful society. Many industries have jobs they want to fill, but they don't have enough qualified workers to fill them. As Andy mentioned about Brookings and other studies, Brookings found that in the next decade, 3 million workers will be needed in the infrastructure industry. This includes career and transportation, housing, and telecommunications. CTE ensures more Americans are able to make the shift from high school to these successful in-demand fields with the tools they need to be successful. And when they succeed in these fields, we all succeed. That's why it's important that we in Congress do everything we can to make sure state and local leaders have the tools they need to ensure these programs are designed for today's industry needs. Unfortunately, these programs are operating under a federal law that has not been updated in more than a decade. But as Andy said, we're planning to mark up the bill tomorrow. Between technological advances and a strong economy, a changing economy, students, workers, and employers are facing very different realities than they did 10 years ago. The law must be modernized so that it accurately reflects the realities and challenges today's students and teachers are facing. Last year, Congress came very close to passing a bipartisan bill that would deliver much-needed CTE reforms. We're able to successfully pass the bill out of the House with the strong majority of 405 to 5. That's not something we see every day. However, it did not make its way out of the Senate before the Congress ended in December. Now, that's something we do see more and more every day. Fortunately, just last month, Representative Glenn Thompson of Pennsylvania and Democrat Raja Krishnamurti from Illinois teamed up to reintroduce a nearly identical bill for the 115th Congress, with several of our members supporting their efforts. H.R. 2353, the Strengthening Career and Technical Education for the 21st Century Act, will ensure students are able to gain the knowledge, skills, and experience needed to compete for and succeed in those 3 million in-demand jobs and more. This bill empowers state and local leaders to craft the career and technical education programs that best meet the needs of their communities. It increases transparency and accountability by providing parents, students, and other stakeholders with a voice to set performance goals and evaluate the effectiveness of the programs. Both of these reforms are essential to ensuring the programs are working and students are succeeding. We set the model for that with the WIOA bill and the reauthorization of WIA. The bill cuts bureaucratic red tape by reducing administrative burdens and simplifying the process for students to apply for federal resources. It also reins in the Secretary of Education's authority, ensuring a limited federal role. But most importantly, the bill improves the alignment of CTE programs with in-demand jobs by supporting innovative learning opportunities, building stronger community partnerships, and encouraging stronger engagement with employers. Just last week, I led a bipartisan group of members on a visit to California, where we heard about the number of jobs that remain unfulfilled due to students' lack of proper skills. We also heard on behalf of the private sector efforts to work with schools to close the skills gap. There are some exciting things happening. While the efforts are being made, Republicans and Democrats firmly believe more must be done to address this issue. At the end of the day, we want students who go through these programs to learn the skills they need to compete and secure high-paying, good-paying, high-skilled jobs. There's much to be done to get this bill past the finish line, but I'm confident these reforms will be well received this Congress, as they have been in past years, and that members from both sides of the aisle will come together to support this effort. The committee will be considering the bill tomorrow. I'm looking forward to continuing the work with my colleagues across the aisle to make sure it gets across the finish line. I want to thank AEI again for putting together this event for such a timely topic and inviting me to discuss this good work with you and what the committee is doing. Our members will continue examining the challenges and opportunities facing K-12 and higher education systems. We're going to work to ensure ESSA is properly implemented, and we'll also look forward to reforming higher education through the reauthorization of the Higher Education Act. Most importantly, we'll look for innovative initiatives to support, like successful CTE programs that better prepare students for today's workforce. These are exciting times in education. The innovation occurring at schools across the country is providing schools new opportunities to gain the skills they need to achieve a lifetime of success. We now have a chance to encourage that innovation, strengthen our schools, and help more men and women achieve the dream of furthering their educations in whatever form that might take. A new Congress and a new administration mark a new beginning for America, one that is full of new opportunities. It's time to roll up our sleeves and seize them, and I'm looking forward to doing just that and partnering with all of you as you come to us with your ideas, concerns, and your insights to help shape the work we have ahead. There is plenty to do for all of us. Thank you again very much, and God bless you.
First of all, thank you for joining us and for the
Thank you, Andy.
terrific remarks. Let's just jump into it. One of the most interesting things that you said, among many interesting things, is this recognition that the labor force is changing, the economy is changing, and it seems like it's changing rapidly, continuously, and we don't know when it's going to stop. As a conservative, I have a tendency to think under those conditions, a big federal law is typically the last thing that's going to be nimble enough, quick enough, smart enough, adaptable enough to get it done. So one thing that's on my mind is, given the conditions of the economy, the labor force, is reauthorization of the Perkins Act the right thing right now? How can it be helpful? How do you think about these issues?
Well, again, if many of you have heard me speak at all, you would know that I believe the federal government has no role in education. So if God put me in charge for a short period of time, I would go back to the Constitution and I would get rid of the federal government in education. But that's not going to happen. And so the next best thing for us to do is to spend hardworking taxpayers' money as well as we can possibly spend it. And so my goal is, again, to push transparency at every step and to push accountability. So when we are spending hardworking taxpayer dollars, I want people to be accountable for them. I want them to produce what they say they're going to produce. I want people to get benefit. If they're going to be in programs, I don't care what it is, but whether it's in the military, in education, in healthcare, I want benefit from it.
So when I was a young congressional staffer back in 2000, 2001, and they were thinking about doing NCLB, the narrative that we heard on the right more than anything else was, for 30 years we've been spending all this money on Title I, we've been spending this huge streams of money down to states and districts, and it is not accountable enough. So we need more accountability metrics. We need to force states and districts to behave better with all of this money. Lo and behold, NCLB happens. 15 years later, we're saying, my heavens, way too much accountability. We're bossing around the states and districts too much. So I'm wondering, how do we think about that in terms of CTE, which is, it could be the case that the federal government is telling states and districts to do too many things, too many reporting requirements, but it could also be the case that if we loosen the reins too much, next thing we know, this just becomes a stream of money that doesn't get any outcomes. So how do you strike that balance?
Well, by requiring them to have clear mission statements, clear objectives, and measurable objectives. For better or worse, as I said, I've been in this business for a long time, and so I can remember many years ago when we started doing that in educational programs and saying, you know, you've got to show what you are doing. I think that what happened with No Child Left Behind was you atomized it to the point where the data you got was useless, basically, because it just really didn't tell you what you needed to get. But I think now what we're doing is going to give us some accountability that we can really judge whether a program is being successful or not being successful. And the more you push things down to the local level, the better off we are. Again, I was on a school board for 12 years, and school board members will be responsive to parents. They will be. And the more you can do, but with the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, we put more employers on the workforce investment boards, and we gave more control to them, less control to bureaucrats. And I think once you do those kinds of things, then you will get results.
Why do you think that it seems almost over generations that at this moment there are more men out of work than ever before, including able-bodied men who we think could work that have just completely dropped out of the workforce? Is it a skills issue, or is there more to the story?
I think, actually, AEI has written a lot about this, and I've paid a lot of attention to it in the last few months, and have read a lot of articles about it. And I noticed AEI doesn't have the answer to that. So, but I think it's multifaceted. I think one of the issues is the devaluing of skills development. Certainly, I think that is true. And that if people don't feel they're competent to get a bachelor's degree, and they have high expectations of them, maybe they just drop out so they don't have to be measured against those expectations. I do think that under the Affordable Care Act, we opened up Medicaid to single adults with no children. Mm-hmm. And so you could get health care benefits. And I do think that had something to do with it. We have more and more unmarried people with no children on welfare. And if you're getting welfare, why do you need to go to work?
So it's not just about skills. There's some of these public policies we also have to look at the same time.
As you said in your opening statements, this is a complicated, multifaceted issue.
So that's a good segue to this next question, which is that CTE, broadly understood, can encapsulate a whole lot of things. It could be new high schools, it could be new community colleges, reform community colleges, more apprenticeships. The way we think about this is there's a skills gap. Human beings could have jobs, and we just need to skill them up, educate them so they get there. Do you have recommendations? What should states prioritize among the list of possibilities?
Well, I think North Carolina does a pretty good job in this area. I'm sure there are other states who do lots of things, but I think encouraging students early on to think about their careers. We have early college programs. We have something called the Perkins Act in North Carolina, where students they can get as much as an associate's degree when they're still in high school. And I think legislators ought to be looking at this and saying, we're not going to continue to pay for the same education over and over again. Mm-hmm. In fact, I've encouraged the legislature in North Carolina to say, look, whether you're planning to get a bachelor's degree or not, we want to encourage you to get into college work while you're in high school. And then if and when the students decide to go on past the high school, and we know people aren't going to get meaningful jobs if they don't have at least 2 years beyond high school, then they're way ahead of the game. Now people are saying we've got to start in the 6th grade. I think you need to raise awareness of what's out there with students and encourage them as early as possible. But I think getting them enrolled into programs. You know, when I was at Appalachian State in the early 70s, we had programs where we had students, teachers in the high schools with master's degree teaching as much as 2 years of credit in the high school for students. They got ASU transcripts when they graduated and could go anywhere they wanted to in the country. I thought that was going to take off in the 70s, and it hasn't. I think we need to do more and more of that, of helping people accelerate their programs. It also has a secondary but very beneficial effect of lowering the cost of continuing your education past high school.
So let me just take a risk here. If you don't mind, just indulge me. If you have at least a 4-year college degree, a BA or higher, could you please raise your hand? Okay, so for those watching at home, virtually everyone in the room raised their hand. That is not America, though. So there's this saying that the people who make education policy were the ones who were really good at education.
Correct.
So most of the people doing education policy, thinking about what it means to do successful post-secondary, they went to a 4-year college or beyond, and they think that is the path to success, represented in this room. And that is a path. One of the most interesting things you said is by talking about college for all, we have a way, even inadvertently, of diminishing these other kind of paths, suggesting to kids that unless you go on that path, you're lesser. So could you say something about that?
Well, again, you know, my skills are pretty limited. And I suspect most of the people in here with a baccalaureate degree have pretty limited skills when it comes to fixing your plumbing or doing things around your house, maybe doing things with your car. You're pretty limited. And yet, again, over the years, we have not given the credence and the credit and the respect to people who can do things with their hands. And I want to say to you now that I think there's a real crisis also in baccalaureate degree programs, because many of the people coming out of baccalaureate degrees don't have the skills they need to do what they need to do. Again, when most of us went to college, my age, we learned a lot about writing, reading, and computation. Students don't have those skills now. The most difficult skill we have to fill in Washington, D.C. is the skill of writing. And even baccalaureate degree programs aren't giving people skills. So if you think about skills on a very broad basis, now I can use a computer fairly well. It's necessary in my life. And as I said, my brother, who is a journeyman carpenter and an engineer, showed me how to do that. God bless him. It would have been a lot harder for me to figure it out on my own because I'm not that intuitive about those things. So I use a computer, and most of us have to use a computer these days. But we need, again, the broad range of skills, and without sort of life skills, and they even teach courses in school called life skills, how to balance a checkbook, how to do those kinds of things. We need them all, whether we have a baccalaureate degree or we don't have a baccalaureate degree.
That's right. Let's open it up to questions from the audience. We have about 10 minutes. I think my colleague Grant has a microphone that he'll move around. As I said, please, if you don't mind, name, affiliation, and please ask a question.
Hi, Dr. Foxx. It's Tamar Jacoby, Opportunity America. So you talked a little bit, you mentioned employers and CTE. I've heard you talk in a very bracing and encouraging way about two employers, both talking about the opportunities for employers in the reauthorized Perkins, but also the challenges for employers. And I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about what the reauthorized bill does to engage employers in different ways. And then I also love to hear your predictions about the Senate. Is the Senate going to behave differently this year?
I don't have a crystal ball. So I'm hoping very much that we'll find a champion in the Senate. For a long time, WIOA sat in the Senate, I think like 15 months or so. No, maybe not quite that long, about 14 months. And then all of a sudden, somebody, a light bulb went off. And the bill passed. So I think I'm always hopeful, again, that will happen. We hear, I think every member of Congress hears every day from an employer that they don't have the skilled folks that they need. And this is going to put the onus on employers to be involved. I had an employer from North Dakota call me last fall. He was desperate for diesel mechanics. I'm not sure how he got my name, but he called me, and I talked with him, and I said, well, do you know about your Workforce Investment Board? And he said, no, I've never heard of that. And so everywhere I go now, I say to employers, okay, are you on your Workforce Investment Board? If not, do you know the people on your WIB? And many times they don't. And so the employers do have to take some responsibility here. We're giving them the tools they need. Now they have to pick up on them. And what I always ask them is, come back to me and tell me if there's a deficiency in the law that we need to fix. Because the way members of Congress get their ideas is from their constituents. Or that's the way I get mine. I mean, we need to know what's working and what's not working. So the onus is now on the employers to tell us what's working.
Paige?
Yes, Jamal Abdulalim, Senior Staff Writer at Diverse Issues in Higher Education. One of the things you alluded to was fostering innovation at the local and state level. So I'm wondering two things. One, did you envision doing that by way of grants or something else? And the other question would be, you alluded to red tape and bureaucracy kind of standing in the way of some things. I'm wondering if you can provide some examples of red tape that you plan to remove through this proposed legislation? Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, we want the applications to be much simpler, and we want the folks who are applying to be able to state much more clearly what it is they plan to do and how they plan to measure what it is they are doing. And then I think you asked the question about integration of the programs. Was that what you said?
Innovation.
Innovation, excuse me. Innovation. One of the things that we know about now is that we have all these opportunities for online learning. We have opportunities for distance learning. And I think what we need to do is encourage as much of that as we possibly can. And honestly, I can't even tell you what all the possibilities are out there because people come up with new ones every single day. And I think we're long past the time, again, whether you're talking about a baccalaureate degree or you're talking about high school or you're talking about community colleges, where you've got a professor standing up in front of 50 or 300 students lecturing to them. There's much more happening now with hands-on, with collaborative learning. We're hearing so much more about that. And again, the programs on the computers, one of the things I keep running into with people at the national level and at the local level is how they're developing all these creative programs to help people get, again, the most basic skills that they need, which are being able to read, being able to critically think, being able to compute, all of those things. I think we have to start there. And the myriad of programs that is out there for those kinds of things is just phenomenal. So I want to encourage people. I think one of the big drawbacks to that is having the teachers have the time to get to know what is available to them. I think that is a real handicap because our teachers are busy all day long, and unless programs can be created in the summertime and for them to have time off, they're hampered in their ability to be able to become acquainted with the programs.
We probably have time for one more question. Thank you.
Good morning, Judy Mortrude from Center for Law and Social Policy. Thank you for sharing that story about your brother. That's so powerful. When I hear stories like that, I think about the 14 out of the 17 that didn't complete that program. So my question is, what's the federal role in helping programs mitigate all those barriers to success that students experience?
Good question.
Well, as I said, I don't think the federal government has to take on this responsibility. I think it's our responsibility as citizens, it's our responsibility as a culture to change the way we think about these things. That's why language is so important to us. That's why I talk constantly about that T word and about college degree as opposed to certification. I just think it's very, very important that all of us become sensitized to the language we use and the attitude that we have. Because the federal government, you can't change these things with laws. You can set the tone for them, but you have to engage people. That's why I keep talking about it. And I hope you will too. And everywhere I go, when I raise the issue, light bulbs go off in people's head and they say, oh, you're right, you're right. And I'm just urging everybody that I talk to, look at your literature and see, what does your literature say? What does it impart to people in terms of attitude toward them? I mean, the whole fact that we use a term called CTE. Let me ask you one other question. Most of you have a 4-year degree. What did you want when you got that 4-year degree? What were you looking for? A job, a career, right? That's what everybody wants. So why is it that we say higher education and career and technical education? Again, if I could change those things, I would. I can't unilaterally, but I'm trying to get everybody to think, I want a job. What? You know, it's the same thing. By the way, Harvard College began as a vocational school. Okay? If you don't believe me, look it up.
That's right.
Harvard began as a vocational school.
So let's just finish here. If you don't mind, I want to just take this opportunity. Obviously, everyone knows that we live in tough political times, and members of Congress face lots of tough issues right now. I'm trying to be diplomatic. But I want to honestly say thank you for your public service. This is a tough time to be in the spotlight, and thank you in particular for your service on these kind of issues that we all here care so much about. Thank you for joining us.
But it's a great opportunity, too.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.